The first time I saw Greystone Lighthouse, I thought it was a painting. One of those bleak ocean scenes framed in dusty antique shops. The sky was bruised, clouds dragging across it like old wounds, and the sea was already restless, frothing at the base of the cliffs like something alive. I stepped out of the van with my duffel slung over one shoulder and stared up at the tower. It stood alone on the edge of the world, tall and gray, wind-raked and stubborn, its lantern room crowned in fog. A chill crept down my spine, but I shook it off. I wasn't here for ghost stories. The assignment was simple: oversee the automated beacon through winter. Just maintenance checks, log entries, weather updates. The lighthouse had been upgraded years ago, but a human presence was still required, just in case. The last keeper, Connor Hayes, had vanished the previous winter, left his things behind. No signs of struggle, just gone. The locals in the nearby village whispered about it, said the sea took him. Some said something else did. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of salt, rust, and dust that no wind could reach. The base level housed the keeper's quarters. Small bed, wood stove, old books lining the shelves, a writing desk with a faded logbook. I unpacked slowly, listening to the storm building outside. The windows rattled. Wind howled like a wounded animal, and the first drops of rain began to lash the glass. I decided to check the beacon before the storm worsened. The climb was longer than I expected. Stone steps spiraled upward, each one worn smooth by decades of boots. My own footsteps echoed strangely. It felt like I was ascending into something ancient, something watching. At the top, I opened the heavy iron door to the lantern room. The wind nearly tore it from my hands. Inside, the beacon pulsed steadily, its rotation slow and mechanical. I could hear the hum of the system, the whir of gears. It was electric now, not oil-based, but the air was warm, too warm, and it smelled, faintly, like burnt oil. That didn't make sense. I moved closer, inspecting the gears. Everything looked fine, but the warmth lingered. I touched the glass, then looked up, just as lightning cracked through the sky. In the reflection, I saw him. A bearded man, soaked and grim, standing just behind me. Yellow slicker, sea-weathered face. I spun around, heart pounding. No one. Just the empty lantern room and the wild, screaming wind. For a moment, I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. Then the thunder rolled, deep and angry, and I stepped back from the glass. I told myself it was a trick of the light. A trick of the storm, a trick of my tired mind. But that night, as I tried to sleep in the narrow bed downstairs, I couldn't stop thinking about the reflection, about how real it looked, and how the room had smelled, not like electricity, but like something older, something left behind, something that remembered oil. I woke to blackness, not the kind that comes when you close your eyes, but a swallowing void, the kind you feel in your chest. The storm had knocked the power out. No gentle hum of the heater, no faint rotation of the beacon above. Just silence, then the long, low groan of the wind squeezing through cracks in the stone. I groped for the old lantern by the bedside, fingers trembling as I lit the wick. The flame flickered to life, casting shadows that danced along the walls like they had something to say. I told myself it was just the weather. Power would return soon. But a gnawing thought whispered beneath that logic. This was no ordinary storm. Outside, the rain came down in sheets. I could hear the ocean thrashing the rocks, waves smashing the cliffside as though trying to reach the very foundation of the tower. I rose, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, and walked toward the window, just gray and black and chaos. That's when I heard it. Faint, deliberate. Boot steps on stone. Someone was on the staircase. I froze, breath caught in my throat, trying to convince myself it was the wind playing tricks. But the sound came again, slow, uneven. Someone climbing. There was no one else in the lighthouse. Lantern in hand, I stepped into the hallway. The light bobbed with my movement, casting long, twitching shadows along the curved walls. I put my foot on the first stair and paused. Stillness. Then, another step above me, soft and wet. I began to climb. The stone steps were slick, and halfway up I saw it, wet footprints. They glistened in my lantern's glow, water trailing upward, as if someone had just passed by. The pattern was erratic, dripping heavily, like a man soaked through. My heartbeat thundered louder than the storm outside. Each step felt colder, heavier, like I was walking into the mouth of something ancient. The spiraling stairs led up and up until I reached the metal door to the lantern room. It was shut tight, the handle slick with moisture. I hesitated. Then, slowly, the door creaked, not with the wind, not with rust. It opened by itself. The lantern flame quivered, light spilling into the beacon room. The great lens stood still, dark and lifeless. The scent of burnt oil still hung in the air, clinging to the metal walls. But there was no one inside. I stepped in cautiously, scanning every corner. My breath fogged in front of me. The silence was thick, oppressive. I turned slowly, the lantern high, casting rings of trembling light across the glass panels. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just me and the storm. And then, just as I turned to leave, the door groaned behind me, shutting itself. I stood there, frozen, gripping the lantern tight, heart racing. Something was here. I didn't know how I knew. But I knew. The lighthouse was waking up, and I wasn't alone. The door creaked open wider, wind howling through the gap like a warning. I stepped into the beacon room, lantern trembling in my hand. The room was colder than before, icy, like the sea itself had crept in and claimed it. The beacon was still, silent, lifeless. I stepped forward, drawn to the wide glass windows that encircled the top of the tower. Rain streaked down the panes, and beyond them, darkness churned. Then I saw him. A figure stood outside on the narrow catwalk that circled the lantern room, barely more than a ledge with a rusted railing. The storm whipped his yellow raincoat like a flag caught in a tempest. He faced the sea, unmoving, his back to me. I couldn't breathe. The lantern in my hand dropped slightly, and the flame flickered in protest. I knew that coat. I'd seen it in the old photographs stored in the drawer beneath the desk downstairs. That was Connor, the missing keeper, the man everyone said had disappeared into the night without a trace. He was standing right there. I stepped closer to the glass, pressing a hand against it to steady myself. The wind outside screamed, rattling the tower. My heart thudded with a sick, crawling dread. Every part of me screamed to run, to bolt down those stairs and never return. But something about the stillness of the figure kept me rooted. I pushed the beacon room door open fully, and the gale struck me like a fist. Rain lashed my face. The metal of the catwalk groaned beneath the weight of the storm. "Connor!" I shouted into the wind. The figure flinched, just barely. Then, slowly, achingly slow, he turned. His face came into view, and I will never forget it. Deathly pale, lips bluish and cracked, his beard dripping with seawater, and his eyes, milky white, wide, and locked in a gaze that looked through me. Not angry, not pleading, just despair. Centuries of it, etched in every line of his face. He raised one arm, not to threaten, not to wave, but to beckon. He wanted me to come closer. I should have turned and slammed the door shut. I should have run and never looked back. But something deeper than fear compelled me forward. I stepped onto the slick iron walkway, my boots slipping slightly. The cold hit me like a wall, but I pressed on, step by step, until I was only feet away from him. That's when I noticed. His feet weren't touching the metal. They hovered just above it, as if he hung from some invisible thread tied to the clouds. The rain didn't touch him. It passed through him like mist over stone. I stopped moving. His face changed, slowly. His lips peeled back, not into a smile, but something twisted, broken. The blank sadness in his eyes melted away, replaced by something darker. Rage. The arm that had beckoned now lunged forward, And then I understood. I hadn't been invited. I had been summoned. Before I could scream, his hands gripped my shoulders, cold as the grave, strong beyond anything human. My lantern fell, its light swallowed by the wind. The catwalk trembled beneath us. Lightning split the sky. For a single moment, the cliffs below and the sea beyond lit up in white fire. And any poor soul watching from the shore would have seen them. 2 lighthouse keepers, locked in struggle against the storm. Then, the beacon flickered, and one of them vanished. There was no time to scream. The hands on my shoulders tightened like vices, cold, calloused, impossibly strong. I felt myself being shoved back, boots slipping on the rain-slicked catwalk as the metal groaned under our weight. The wind screamed louder, the ocean below a black, hungry void. Connor's face, twisted now with something unrecognizable, no longer sorrowful, no longer beckoning, was a mask of fury and pain. His eyes, milky and lifeless, locked onto mine with a desperation that made no sense, until I realized he wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to trade places. I struggled against him, but my hands met air, as though I were wrestling a shadow with substance. He wasn't entirely here, yet he was. Each shove, each grip, felt real, but there was a slowness to his movements, like he was caught between time and tide. The storm raged around us, lightning flashing again and again, each burst revealing the ghost's face inches from mine. His mouth opened, not to speak but to scream. I could hear it, not in my ears but in my skull. A hollow, echoing wail that poured memories into my head. Waves, darkness, cold. The moment he fell, or jumped, the moment he vanished. He was showing me his end, and now he wanted mine to mirror it. I twisted, trying to wrench free, boots skidding toward the edge. My hand caught the railing, slick and rusted, just as another shove sent pain lancing through my shoulder. I yelled, the sound torn away by the wind. I could feel his pull, not just physically, but something deeper. Like the lighthouse itself had reached out through him, dragging me toward its light, its secret, its curse. We struggled there, ghost and man, past and present, locked in a battle neither of us fully understood. My foot slipped. The sea roared beneath. Then for a breathless second, the wind died. The storm paused, as if the world inhaled. Lightning struck the tip of the lighthouse with a blinding snap, illuminating the entire tower in blue-white fire. From the shore, I imagined how it must have looked. 2 figures on the catwalk, framed in electric brilliance, locked in some ancient cursed ballet. Then, the beacon flickered, and Connor was gone. I was alone. Alone, until the railing gave way. There was no sound when I fell, just the cold rushing up to meet me, and the distant, eternal eye of the lighthouse spinning silently above. Watching. Waiting. The last thing I saw before the ocean swallowed me was the glass room above, lit not by electricity, but by something older. Something that didn't want to let me go. I remember the impact only in fragments. Cold, the kind that doesn't belong in nature. Jagged edges of stone ripping through darkness. The pressure of the ocean swallowing me whole. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, it wasn't daylight that greeted me, but the bruised gray of storm clouds. I was lying on wet, sea-slicked rocks at the cliff's base, gasping as if I'd never breathed before. My body ached, soaked, scraped raw, but alive, somehow. Against every law of physics and mercy, I had survived the fall. I don't remember climbing the cliff, only that my hands bled, my vision blurred, and the wind screamed at me to stop. Each step was punishment. The earth shifted under my boots. The rain made everything treacherous. Still, something pulled me upward, something stronger than fear, louder than pain. I reached the lighthouse door, slumped against it, then pushed inside. Everything had changed. The air was wrong, thicker, colder, like breathing through wet cloth. The stone walls wept moisture, and every sound echoed strangely, as if the space were larger than it had been before. I limped through the hallway, lanternless, shivering, dripping, and then I noticed it. My logbook. It was open on the desk, but the writing wasn't mine. I approached it slowly, heart pounding in a new rhythm of dread. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged, heavy, like someone had pressed too hard into the page. But the name signed at the bottom chilled me to my core. Connor Hayes. And the date was today. The entries spoke of the storm, the catwalk, the light. In detail I hadn't written, words I hadn't used, as if he had been the one keeping the record. I backed away from the desk and caught my reflection in the window, only it wasn't mine. For a fleeting second, I swore it was his. I turned sharply. No one was there. But the door to the stairwell had creaked open again. Up above, somewhere in the tower, I heard a dragging sound. Not footsteps. Not this time. Something else. Like wet rope on stone. The walls groaned as I stepped forward. Shadows shifted without light. I wasn't sure anymore if I was in the lighthouse, or if the lighthouse was in me. Whatever had thrown me from that catwalk hadn't finished. I wasn't just a visitor now. Something had let me live, but not to leave. Nights lost all sense of time after the fall. The lighthouse ticked differently now, like it kept time for another world entirely. I couldn't tell how long I'd been back, whether it had been hours or days, but the dark never seemed to lift. The storm had moved on, yet a weight still pressed against the walls, like the sea had left behind more than water. At first, I thought the whispers were in my head, faint at night, barely louder than the sighing wind. But they grew clearer, distinct. A man's voice, raspy, worn, calling my name from corners that should have been empty. Ethan. Sometimes it came from the stairwell, other times from beneath the floorboards or through the rusted vents in the keeper's quarters. Always low, always urgent. Connor. The name began to follow me like a shadow. Tools I hadn't touched since the first night were found out of place. Screwdrivers left near the base of the spiral stairs. Lanterns moved from the shelf to the door, logs dated but unwritten. One night, I found the radio powered on, even though the generator hadn't been running since the storm. Only static at first. Then a voice through the static. I froze, hand hovering above the dial. Couldn't leave, not while it's awake. I yanked the cord. The silence afterward was louder than the voice. Sleep brought no escape. I'd wake to see the door cracked open even though I'd locked it. My breath would fog in the room as though something unseen had just passed through. And I began dreaming. Not dreams, really, but memories that weren't mine. Images of staring into the beacon's blinding light. The sensation of being watched by something inside it. The slow unraveling of sanity while wind battered the walls and salt ate through flesh. I stopped sleeping. I stopped writing in the log, because the pages started filling themselves. One morning, bleary-eyed and shaking, I opened a drawer I hadn't dared touch before. It had always been sealed. Jammed, I thought. But that morning, it slid open effortlessly. Inside, I found Connor's letter. The envelope was yellowed, the seal half melted by time and moisture. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was jagged and erratic, as if written in panic. The ink was smudged, but I read every word. If someone finds this, I'm sorry. I tried to leave, but the light wouldn't let me. I thought it was just loneliness, just the sea. But something lives in the rotation, in the rhythm, a presence behind the pulse. It watches through the glass. It knows when you look away. That's when it moves. That's when it marks you. I stayed too long. You shouldn't have come. It remembers me, and it wants another. I dropped the letter and stumbled back. In the silence that followed, the beacon above creaked to life. It hadn't moved in days. I didn't go up. Not yet. I sat with the letter gripped in my hand and the sound of gears turning above. A faint hum echoed through the walls again, deep and inhuman, as if something far below the surface was stretching awake. Later that night, I looked in the mirror, and for a full heartbeat, I didn't see myself. Not exactly. It was still my shape, my stance. But the eyes were wrong. The coat was yellow, and the mouth moved, even though mine did not. Connor was still here, and something had brought me back not to survive, but to replace. The echoes weren't fading. They were building. Something had returned with me from the sea, and now it lived in the light. The storm returned with no warning, no roll of thunder, no slow build of wind. 1 minute the lighthouse stood in cold, dead silence, and the next it was alive again, shuddering beneath the weight of the gale. Rain lashed the glass panes above like it wanted in. The wind moaned through cracks that hadn't existed yesterday. Or maybe they had. Maybe I just hadn't been changed enough to notice. Connor's voice returned, louder now, clearer, no longer hidden in whispers or static. "Ethan, it's awake." I didn't ask what it was. I already knew. I climbed the spiral staircase for what I prayed would be the last time. Each step groaned underfoot, and the closer I got to the beacon, the heavier the air became. Thick, electric, tasting of rust and sea rot. When I reached the top, the lantern room pulsed like a heartbeat. The beacon rotated slowly, not smoothly like before, but in lurches, groaning with age or resistance. I stepped inside. The hum of the rotation filled my bones, a frequency that bypassed sound and went straight into my skull. Shadows cast by the beam danced across the glass like trapped things, arms, hands, shapes with no names. The room reeked again of burnt oil, and behind the gears, something waited. I found it, a narrow panel I hadn't noticed before, just behind the rotation housing. I pried it open. Rust flaked off in sharp curls. Inside was a hidden chamber no bigger than a crawl space. Dust choked the air. Water had seeped in, warping pages of a journal that lay sprawled among personal items. A compass, a silver pocket watch, a pair of broken spectacles. A cracked mirror, draped in cloth, leaned against the wall. I should have left it covered, but I didn't. I pulled the cloth free, and the light in the room flickered. I didn't see my reflection. Connor stared back. He mirrored every move. My raised hand, my breath fogging the glass. But it wasn't just mimicry. It was hunger. Every movement felt like it pulled something from me. Like the reflection wasn't just reflecting, it was copying, learning, rehearsing, to replace. I staggered back, heart racing, and the beacon suddenly spun faster, far faster than it should have been capable of. Light burst across the room in violent, erratic pulses. The sound of metal grinding filled the tower, and then I heard his voice again. This time, not from the walls or vents, from behind me. "Don't let it take you too." I turned. Connor stood in the doorway, not hovering, not snarling, just there. His soaked yellow raincoat hung heavy, his face gaunt and gray, but his eyes had clarity now. A final warning. The shadows spun faster. The beacon was spiraling out of control, casting warped figures along the walls. The tower shook. Glass cracked. Something old and furious stirred in the light. I knew what had to be done. I lunged toward the main breaker panel. Bare wires, rusted switches, pulsing with power they shouldn't have had. But before I reached it, the door burst open with the wind, and the ghost surged forward. Connor, or what had once been Connor, now overtaken by something deeper, angrier. A force that used his face, his voice. It screamed without sound, rushed me like a wave. We collided on the catwalk again. Rain soaked us both. Lightning flashed, and I saw the reflection of that first struggle. Only this time, I wasn't the one being thrown. I fought harder. I remembered the mirror, the journal, the words in the letter. It lives in the light. I twisted the lever that controlled the rotation speed and wrenched the entire housing loose. Sparks exploded from the gears. The beacon stuttered. The light faltered. The scream from the ghost filled every inch of the tower. And then, quiet. The storm paused again, like the world had stopped spinning. Connor's figure faded before me, dissolved into mist, drifting out over the railing like sea smoke. I stood alone in the silence, heart hammering. The beacon had gone dark. For the first time since I arrived, the lighthouse was still. But I knew better. I left the tower at dawn, walking into the thick fog that hugged the cliffs. My legs shook. My eyes burned. But the light stayed off, and I didn't look back. Not even when I heard the rotation click once. Then again. Faint, but steady. Somewhere, deep inside the glass. Like a new heartbeat. Like something waiting, watching, still alive.